Immigration has always been more than just the movement of people. It is a force that reshapes economies, transforms cultures, and redefines nations. In the case of the United Kingdom, immigration is often framed as a recent phenomenon or a political talking point, but it has been woven into the country's history for centuries. From the early days of industrialization to the post-World War II rebuilding, from the free movement era under the European Union to the restrictive policies of the Brexit years, every phase of immigration has left an imprint on Britain's economic fortunes. What makes the story compelling is not just the scale of arrivals, but the complex ways in which the economy has risen, adapted, and sometimes struggled under demographic change. The modern era begins in the early 1900s with the Aliens Act of 1905, Britain's first attempt to regulate the flow of foreigners, largely aimed at Jewish refugees fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe. That legislation marked the start of a balancing act, recognizing immigrants' economic usefulness while responding to fears of social disruption. Ironically, as Britain introduced restrictions, it was also entering an industrial phase that made immigrant labor indispensable. The most famous chapter began after the Second World War, when Britain faced a shattered economy and severe labor shortages. Factories, hospitals, and transport services were desperate for workers. To fill these gaps, Britain turned to its empire and Commonwealth. The Windrush generation of 1948 from the Caribbean symbolized this new phase. Over the following decades, thousands arrived from Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, India, Pakistan, and Africa. Economically, they sustained industries that would have stalled and gave the newly created NHS the workforce it needed. These immigrants often worked in difficult, low-paid roles native workers avoided. Yet pressures on housing, services, and integration soon surfaced. Issues still echoed today. By the 1960s and 1970s, immigration policy tightened. The Commonwealth Immigrants Acts of 1962 and 1968 and the Immigration Act of 1971 reflected rising public unease. Yet the economy kept pulling migrants in. Manufacturing declined while services expanded, and immigrants filled both low-wage and skilled positions. This was also when Britain entered the European Economic Community, 1973, a decision that would reshape migration decades later. The real turning point arrived in the 1990s and 2000s. After the EU's 2004 expansion, the UK was one of only 3 countries allowing immediate free movement of workers. The result was dramatic. Hundreds of thousands of Poles, Lithuanians, Slovaks, and others arrived seeking higher wages. Economically, this influx was a double-edged sword. Migrants provided a flexible workforce, kept wages low in sectors like agriculture, hospitality, and construction, and boosted tax revenues. They also helped moderate inflation during growth years. But they increased competition for low-skilled jobs, added pressure on housing, and strained schools and healthcare in certain regions. Academic studies, especially by University College London, showed that EU migrants contributed more in taxes than they claimed in benefits. But that finding did little to quiet political unease. Immigration became a lightning rod, linked not just to economics, but identity and sovereignty. The Brexit referendum of 2016 was the culmination of this tension. The promise to take back control of borders became the Leave campaign's most powerful slogan. After Brexit, free movement for EU nationals ended, replaced by a points-based system prioritizing skills over origin. This shifted migration flows. Non-EU arrivals increased, especially students and healthcare workers. But sectors once reliant on EU workers, hospitality, farming, logistics, suffered shortages. Britain faced a paradox. Politically, it demanded tighter borders, but economically, it still depended on newcomers to sustain growth in public finances. From an economic perspective, immigration's impact can be read in 3 layers: labor supply, public finances, and long-term growth. Migrants typically arrive at younger working ages, expanding the workforce and easing pressures from an aging society. Without immigration, the UK would face sharper pension and healthcare challenges. Public finances, too, have often benefited. Economists debate whether immigration makes Britain richer per person or simply larger in aggregate. GDP growth has undeniably been boosted, but GDP per capita, a closer measure of individual prosperity, has risen more slowly. This gap explains why economists see net positives, while parts of the public feel little personal benefit. Immigration carries costs that are harder to measure. Rapid inflows push up housing demand and strain transport, schools and hospitals if investment lags behind. These pressures fuel political backlash even when the fiscal impact remains positive. Another subtle cost emerges as immigrant communities age. The first generation arrives young, but decades later, many retire, adding to the very pressures they once helped relieve. In this sense, immigration provides a demographic dividend, but only temporarily, unless renewed continuously. A surprising insight is that recent immigrants often contribute more fiscally than long-term residents. New arrivals are typically young, working, and claiming few benefits. Over time, as families grow, their net contribution converges with the national average. Migration flows also matter. International students initially contribute modestly, but if retained, add significant long-term value. Post-Brexit policies extending graduate work rights are already reshaping labor markets in ways not anticipated. Restrictive policies bring their own ripple effects. When visa thresholds rise, sectors like agriculture or social care face severe shortages. Employers respond by raising wages, outsourcing, or automating more quickly. These economic side effects rarely feature in political debates but matter greatly in practice. Immigration policy is never just about borders. It is about how the economy adapts, who benefits, and who bears the costs. Looking across decades, the story is clear. Immigration has been both lifeline and source of friction. After World War II, it rebuilt industries and staffed the NHS. In the 2000s, it fueled growth but widened inequality. After Brexit, it forced the UK to confront trade-offs between political promises and economic needs. Today, with net migration at record highs, Britain again stands at a crossroads. Leaders must reconcile public demand for reduced numbers with the reality that the economy depends on immigration for growth, services, and demographic balance. The debate is not just about numbers, but about skills, composition, and infrastructure.